because interesting enough, I had been doing data entry, horrible monkey job for a while, and I was really looking to get into information security. Like I was thinking maybe just like IT actually at the time. And I was probably a junior in college. I got an opportunity to jump over to this internship, being like a total pleb, help desk lackey. I actually reported, I think I technically reported to Ryan.
I was not.
So I was really low at the time.
I had no authority.
My technical expertise at the time was I was able to carry a monitor across a campus, and we were switching CRTs to flat screens, and so I got to carry all the CRTs, which sucked.
Yeah.
But anyways, I really appreciate Ryan asking me to do this. It's interesting to look back and see how the path has gone. We're working together. We work at different companies. We're kind of in the same field now. 15 years later, I was an intern there. I was doing sysadmin. I got an opportunity to jump into doing security vulnerability remediation work, because basically no one wanted to do it, and this got like shoveled to the intern, and I ended up really enjoying it, learning a lot about automation, learning about vulnerabilities, and the rest is kind of history. I jumped to offensive security after leaving there because of another friend that I ended up working with. He actually works with me now, and that was probably about 10 or so years ago. So I've been doing offensive security consulting for about 10 years. That's kind of my background. I was trying to ponder what I could share that would be of value, and I'm hoping to have some interplay with people in the audience. Don't be shy. But I'm curious, how many of you actually work in like defense? Like, are you blue team? Okay, I was anticipating that most people would be in defense. So I was trying to think of something I could share that would actually be valuable for offense and defense, because I know there are some people that work in offense as well. But really, we're all just one big happy team, right? Right. Until the report gets released. All right. All right. So I'm going to talk about threat modeling, and it's intentionally vague, but I thought we could have a good discussion. Like I was saying, I was trying to think of something valuable, and what I have seen and been fortunate to see over the last 10 years or so is that I've been able to have a front row seat to compromising, Fortune 50 companies, and a lot of them. So like I felt fortunate to be in that seat and able to share, seeing different defensive strategies in play. And I think there's a lot of interesting observations that kind of come to light after you see how several different organizations try to solve the same problems with different varying amounts of success. So we're talking about threat modeling. All right, so when you think of your standard threat model, we're generally thinking, I'm going to kind of narrow it down. Threat modeling could be anything. You can threat model like your house against a baby, right? If you're a parent, you've done that. But we're going to kind of narrow it into talking about in an enterprise environment, specifically talking about threat modeling against some kind of adversary that's going to be, trying to attack the company. We're going to pretend we're in like a blue team role, maybe somewhat strategic, maybe technical as well. And generally talking about the specific things that we're going to look at and how we might simulate in our mind thinking through a compromise. So, you guys are all familiar with like kill chain. I hate that term, but it really works, and I can't find any better terms. So I'm going to use kill chain. So we're going to talk through the kill chain in kind of 3 different scenarios, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the takeaways that I've seen, how those play out with how organizations have approached it, after the fact, and get into maybe how that applies to leadership and to like detection engineering, as well as kind of like how an offensive person might approach attacking an organization as well. So how many of you guys have done a tabletop threat modeling exercise? Okay, whoa, a lot of you have. Okay, nice. I was kind of trying to think of what drives the way that our current threat models are designed and how we think about them, and what are the major reasons that our threat models look the way they do. And one of the ways I kind of thought about that is that we kind of consume things. I mean, a lot of us probably at Twitter, like InfoSec, Twitter is still a thing. But we're taking in articles that people have written, other content people generate, and outside of our own organizations that we may be working with or our client relationship, we are seeing things that happen in the media or the news, right? So we'll see, hacker gets in, breach happens, ransomware happens, XYZ. In addition to that, we have our kind of our own assumptions. And one of the things that, I've seen a lot of times is that there are assumptions that kind of get fueled by different biases in the industry, and they get kind of entrenched, and they're difficult to work out of or think outside of. So I'm going to talk about some of those. So the first scenario that I thought would be interesting to walk through is generally how a basic 101 style compromise might happen, like the most basic threat model that people kind of come up with, and how it looks from them going through the kill chain against like one of your standard organizations. So I did not use like standard MITRE language. I just threw it out there, and we can kind of talk about it. But what do you guys think is the most common initial access method? Does anyone have? What was that?
Valid accounts.
Valid accounts, like passwords, right? Like someone's password. Okay.
People. Phishing. Yeah.
Phishing. Phishing. Yes. So I wrote the top two. The top two that I came up with were generally just like a password spray or a malicious document. Those are kind of specific, but you're kind of on it where an attacker is going to get a hold of some credentials somehow, or they're going to get a foothold on a device from a user, generally through like social engineering. And social engineering could be, an email, could be a phone call, whatever. And a lot of times those are going to be some kind of document. But what we see a lot of times is password sprays for us still work. It's been slowly becoming less effective. Like, how many people are familiar with Azure AD? Or actually, I hate their new term, but I refuse to use it. It's like bro IDS. I'm not going to say Zeke. I'm just going to keep it bro. But Azure AD, why would you get rid of AD? Honestly, AD, everyone knows AD. Anyways, I've seen some good advances using like smart lockout and some of the password deny lists and things like that, different terms that you can put in, where companies are actually able to sometimes now have, minimum lengths, maybe 14, 16 characters. A lot of times they have some kind of product that's managing their service accounts, as well as, separate administrator accounts. So a lot of the fronts on the password spray have been diminishing. However, it's still, every compromise I've been a part of, there's going to be a point where I have to get a credential to use somehow, and in some form, maybe plain text or hash or what have you. The second most common one we see is kind of a malicious document, right? So this is very well known. Macros, long-lived macros. Everyone's familiar with enable content, right? My favorite, I love it. I once sent a phishing email, and the woman responded to me. She goes, "I enables all the content." And I was like, "Thank you for enables all the content," with a Z and everything. I was like, "All right, thanks. Maybe I'll pay you next time." I don't know. So that still works, but again, like these common threat models have been the most attacked, I guess, by the blue side, right? So you're probably real familiar with, what you can do. Maybe you can make your macros not execute if they're from the internet. Hopefully that's something you're doing. That's pretty effective. Maybe you can just disable macros entirely. However, there's whole business verticals that run on macros. So that is somewhat difficult. But that's generally something we see. And a lot of things with EDRs and things like that, the malicious documents are getting a little bit harder. What I generally see now is that if an organization has hired me to get into their business, if I'm not able to password spray or anything like that, and they really want me to send an email-based phishing attack, which I hate, it takes about 4 to 5 tries. So my first try, will likely fail if they have any kind of modern EDR, and maybe not. It's like there's a small chance that first one's going to work. Generally, what I'm doing is I'm building a payload that I think will have the most high likelihood of a success. But we're building information as we go, and it takes several attempts. So that's kind of why that piece is a little not my favorite, but still a big part of this most seen threat model that companies have. They're looking at malicious documents, password spray. Generally, there's very common things that an attacker will do when they're first in an environment. So these are not necessarily congruent with what like an advanced attacker would do. But have you guys seen the Conti playbook? No? Oh, yeah. So there's this malware group, Conti, ransomware, I believe, right? And they actually had a guide that they would give their operators of what to do in each scenario. And you could see it was very basic, right? So things that I as an attacker would not do, like running Who Am I? Like, I don't know if anyone runs Who Am I, but that's what was their first thing they had to do in their guide. So generally, that's going to be an area of focus for companies that are looking at the threat model. The next piece of that is, when you land and you're in an environment, an attacker is going to be looking to move laterally. A lot of times what we see, the most common thing here is going to be the user's over-provisioned. So, I think many of you are very familiar with this. You've got an old legacy environment, permissions built on permissions, groups nested with groups, maybe used to have like, NetWare, and you now are on who knows what. Or maybe you have, a lot of people have mainframes and things that are tied in, and that introduces all kinds of interesting challenges. So your default user might have more privileges than you assume, and a lot of times an attacker is keen to find that, and they're going to be able to move laterally in some way using those privileges. I generally made this broad because I'll kind of talk about this a little bit in our second scenario. But there's some privileges that you might not think of being abused that are generally easy to abuse as an attacker, and that can kind of break up how this threat model works. It's generally not just like, hey, a user's local admin to another machine. That's kind of less likely. However, there's still many organizations where every user's a local admin on the machine, which is very bad. Generally, a lot of times people are saying, hey, we're going to do an internal pen test. Your main goal is to get to main admin, right? Like all the internal pen testers are familiar with that. So this last piece, a common privilege escalation, they're going to go straight for Active Directory because everyone has it. Actually, I'm starting to see some environments with no Active Directory, which has all kinds of other problems, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So generally going to go to that, whatever that authentication like pillar of trust is, an attacker is going to be drawn there because that's obviously what's going to grant the highest privileges. All right, so now some more overlooked attack pieces to the kill chain here, right? I think one of the most overlooked initial access ones, and this is all opinion, is just physical, right? So I guess how many of you in a blue team side have dealt with any kind of physical intrusion? 2 of you, 3, 2, okay, 3. It's interesting to me, and I don't want to preemptively talk about this, but one of the reasons I think that physical is so overlooked is that you're not going to generally see a vendor release a threat report and tell you about close-up operations that threat actors are doing. I can guarantee you, like if you've been in IR long enough, you've dealt with it. But vendors, what are they going to sell you? Like a lock for a door, or like a different, different card that can't be cloned. So I think there are some motives in the types of reports that people are getting and the types of threats that they're modeling. And that's kind of like one of the themes that I'm going to be talking about a little bit. Yeah, so one of the things I really like to push is just to have people have just a basic view of their physical security, and that can be interesting in many different ways. When an attacker first lands, a lot of times people are going through those commodity malware, NetUse, NetView, Who Am I type Conti attacks. However, I think one of the most overlooked is that the user can specifically look at your internal file share. How many of you are at a company that's older than 10 years old? 20? 30? All right. Okay. So the older the company, I've found that these companies have a challenge in that there was one file share. Everyone put all their files on the file share for all time. Like I was looking at a file today. It was a login script from 2001. It was written in Kix. And I was like, I remember writing Kix, which Ryan probably remembers writing Kix. So those files, it's almost like they live on forever. But the file shares, as an attacker, for my initial action, just looking for that main repository of where all those files are is extremely valuable. A lot of times you'll find, like, my eye will instantly be drawn to something like Bob's backup, and you like open that file and they basically copy their whole machine over there. Or a lot of times I'll see in a lot of environments they're going with like a virtual desktops now in the VDI environment, and if you use the industry standard storage area equipment like EMC, remember the EMC, a lot of times they open network file shares, and the network file shares, if you connect to that, it doesn't have permissions applied. You can just look and grab snapshots from people's VDI machines. And if you virtualize a domain controller and there's a snapshot there, well, that's a bad day. So yeah, so take a look at your file shares. Know what's being shared there. A lot of times the public file shares, who knows, web developers are storing their web config files. Now with like cloud, are any of you guys familiar with Postman? Okay, I love Postman, but then everyone saves their Postman collections onto the public file share, and in there are credentials. So there's access tokens. There's things like client secrets. If you're familiar with OAuth, the client secrets never change. So like I get that, and it's difficult to revoke that, especially if it's a production app or something like that. So just file shares are great. When you're looking at detection engineering or threat modeling, consider your file shares. That's the takeaway there. I put wiki, but generally this means like Confluence, although not everyone has Confluence anymore. Just whatever it looks like, but that's another one, maybe SharePoint. That's another area we're very similar. People are just dumping things in there. It's a treasure trove of information, especially sensitive information like API keys and things like that. And also, when I'm doing a long-term engagement on the wiki, we'd want to understand how your environment works. And so if you have good documentation, thank you, because then that helps as far as the attacker's understanding the environment as well. So commonly overlooked lateral movement kind of plays off that. One of the things that I kind of find interesting is like we don't really generally think of file shares or shared documents that people are sharing via email or anything like that as being like a security boundary. However, I have found it highly effective to just take like, let's say you have a group, let's say your business intelligence group has a weekly spreadsheet that has all their items that they're dealing with on it. If that's the person that I've compromised, or if that's something I found on the file share, maybe that becomes the malicious document. You're not going to have that mark of the web problem. It's already internal. The machines are already trusting it because they've already opened it if it has a macro. But I can generally put a macro in there, and I've seen really good success with that type of lateral movement, just to be able to change my context. Even better, if you see the file shares that are like IT, IS, you could put things there. Have you guys ever seen the malicious icons or links that can happen too? So like if you put a icon or a link in that share that has a remote resource, it could be like a remotely hosted image. And if you have another foothold on the network, Windows in Microsoft Wisdom has that integrated authentication. So it'll try to authenticate to pull that icon file, and you can get users' hashes that way too. So another thing, if you're putting a malicious icon file in like an IT share, that can be stellar. One of the other pieces here, just kind of like the blended threats. A lot of times what I'll see is people want to go very linear in their threat model. So like the attacker does this, and then they go here, and then they go this way. But what I've found is when I say blended threats, I didn't really know what to term it. But let's say you change context. You generally want to reset and go through all that chain again, because you'll generally find that in a different context, you have different results. So for instance, let's say I had a password spray. But let's say everything on your network or everything on the external network was multi-factor authentication, right? So I have a set of credentials, but it didn't really do anything for me. However, let's say I did get internal to the network later, and you have a single sign-on where or Azure bypasses your conditional access for multi-factor when you're internal. Now I have access to those resources. I should go back, redo my situational awareness, and see what's what. So another great one is like, I was just actually talking about to Ryan in the lobby a little bit, or the bar. Just guess Wi-Fi is a great one. Even if you're on a host, You can connect to that guest Wi-Fi, see if there's another employee on there. Things like that can be very, very beneficial. I've even done where, okay, let's say I password sprayed on the perimeter, and I can get valid credentials. However, everything's multi-factor. What if I drive to your office is your corporate Wi-Fi single factor? Then I could just join the Wi-Fi, and then I'm on the network. So there's those blended threats, right? So it's kind of wireless, kind of physical, kind of network-wise. One thing I've also seen a lot for the next kind of phase of this kill chain for privilege escalation. As a defender, just plug a box into your network once and just start running Wireshark and just see what's going around, because I can't tell you how many times that has been the instant cheat code for a compromise. So let's say I'm on a host and I start capturing network traffic. If you have something like SolarWinds, ServiceNow, and any of those like network discovery tools that are constantly like blasting out. I've seen some NAC products that are constantly authenticating to things. Those credentials can generally sometimes be captured in the network traffic. Even things like SNMP can sometimes be valuable. Less so, but I've even seen things like one time I plugged into a network and it was configured so that it sent down the whole image and a task sequence to provision a device. And I was able to look at that, and it basically had all the credentials to join machine to domain and all that kind of stuff. So that was not good. And it was a DA account. So, all right. Now, one of the things that I thought would be interesting is just to try to think of things. This is, I guess, one thing that I generally do in my operations, and one of the pieces that I like about red teaming the most is that I get to plan the operation, and I kind of feel like that scene from Home Alone where he has the map and he's like going through how he's going to do it. What I found is that if you're operating outside of the threat model to attack an organization, generally there's less defenses, there's less monitoring, less hardening. It's generally a better time for the attacker. And for some reason, I kind of find a lot of times that attackers are generally in this creative mode more so than defenders. However, that's starting to change. And like just for instance, the client that I'm testing or have tested recently, I've seen a lot more honey accounts. I'm seeing a lot more like deception. Things like, they put in like a device, a honeypot, like you guys are probably familiar with like Think's Canary, stuff like that. I'm seeing even like documents that are seeded on like a juicy file share that like I can't help but I would click this. It says passwords.xls. Like, that as an attacker, I'm going to look at that. However, catch me once, and then the next time I'm going to look for the string for the canary freaking domain. But yeah, so those things it's kind of it's going back and forth. I personally feel like, no, man, it's a total opinion, but the blue team I think is innovating actually faster than the red team is these days, which is kind of neat to see. And that's definitely a change than how it used to be. And for social engineering, like this is kind of old hat now, but I just remember absolutely destroying places by sending text messages. And because no one, like, think of a blue team challenge there, right? So it's the corporate mobile device. They click a link on there. There's no URL filtering, all kinds of things there. I recently had an engagement. It's been on my bucket list to use fax. And I recently got to do that where I faxed a QR code. And then that was, if you scan the QR code, it takes them back to a proxied authentication, like attacker in the middle scenario. So then I got the creds and their multi-factor token. And so, yeah, just kind of think of those threat models. These are the ones that are kind of outside the box. I love mobile devices, like, I kind of talk about SMS and things like that. Generally, the mobile devices are, it's a target-rich environment. I've been digging more into almost like the mobile forensics, where like a lot of people's mobile device management is single factor for some reason. And like they allow multiple devices per person. So you can, if you get credentials, you can generally find, if they're using like AirWatch or Mobile Iron, things like that. You can provision that device. A lot of times you'll see that certificates come down That's another one where you might get a certificate to join the Wi-Fi or VPN even, or a lot of times what I see is that there will be access to the Citrix or VDI environment from the mobile device, and that can be a great foothold. Talking about some creative initial actions. How many of you guys are familiar with ServiceNow? Oh yes, I love ServiceNow. ServiceNow. So think of ServiceNow. It's basically done everything I want to do as an attacker and put it in one place, right? So they have information about the assets. They have different technologies that are in place. I've seen places where they store their vulnerability data in there. All those cases and incidents. I've been able to watch my phishing get caught and how they respond, and then different SOAR things they're doing, and they're like, oh, I shouldn't do that next time, and then all kinds of things like that. ServiceNow, if you have it in place, take a hard look at your role-based access, because generally every user has quite broad access to a lot of different information in there, and it's just a treasure trove as far as initial action and recon is concerned. There's places that store credentials in there, and if you want to talk to me more about that off camera, I would love to talk about it. I have a team member who very much wants to try to deploy bribery, because that's one of the things. There are some limitations as a hired red team of things that we can't do that we see real adversaries do, and people don't really have a threat model for that. I have had acquaintances use bribery. It basically took $100 to get past a security guard and get into a data center. So $100 bill, that guy was willing to just say, yeah, go ahead. A drone. Who thinks we could use drones offensively? Yes. Are any of you guys SDR is kind of becoming a thing with the flippers and things like that. But a while back, have any of you guys ever heard of Jacket? There was a mouse jack. It was a vulnerability in Logitech Unify radio protocol where you could take any mouse that was wireless and inject keyboard strokes into it. Yeah, so I was at, this is back when HTAs used to work. I had it where it was just sending and opening HTA, and I walked around the floor of a company and just shell, compromised a ton of machines. Everyone had wireless mice, and so it just Command R, it was like a remote rubber ducky. Just really that. So that was like 2 or 3 years ago. I've heard of people trying to get mics on drones. However, they're not as stable. Like you can get laser mics on Windows, like the help desk is on the radio, maybe SDR to interfere with like wireless headsets to listen to what they're saying, calling for password resets. You might be able to catch a password that way. There's all kinds of cool things I think that are happening with SDR, and someday my employer is going to buy me a drone, and I'm going to prove this out. However, I did see MSRC had a report of a threat actor using a drone before we had a chance, but
yeah, there was a report for some threat actor sending a drone against someone's house and then popping them off Wi-Fi and like as they're reconnecting, capturing the handshake and then connecting to the network through that.
That's brilliant.
Flipper duct tape to the tree.
Weaponized flying flipper. I love it. So kind of just walk through three different threat models, kind of at different levels, different perspectives. One thing I thought was really interesting, and one thing an observation that I took away, a lot of the companies that I've seen being the most secure, the greatest indicator that I can see is not budget. It's not their technology stack. It's not, the size of the business or anything like that. I will say it's mostly leadership. So it's mostly the top leadership. If the top leadership has their head on straight and they're able to empower their, they might have one guy in their staff or whatever. But if that top leadership is in line, I see this good threat modeling happening, as well as, very effective operations in securing their environment. The thing that I thought was neat there is that I think as technologists, we tend to see things as a technological problem first. I know I certainly do this. However, threat modeling, I kind of feel is like a creative pursuit first. And it's interesting to see the people that are very talented at it. And a lot of times I see those people when they're in leadership, they have some of those leadership qualities and they're creative. It goes really well. The other thing I've seen, even sometimes I do see good threat modeling, but like I said, that linchpin is the leadership in place. can really ruin good technical skill, good security controls. It kind of, the boat sinks or floats with leadership. So that's just been my experience. One other thing I've seen that's kind of really interesting is that, for instance, as a like detection engineering, for instance, if you talk to people that do like fraud and abuse, there's crossovers there, and there's different perspectives that can be really interesting. Don't necessarily always look to your bubble for insights on how you can threat model most effectively. Is a lot of times there's crossover on problems that have been solved in other industries and things like that. Okay, extended uses of good threat modeling. How many of you guys ever done like a control effectiveness test? Anyone done that? I know Stuart has. We did. Okay, yeah. So one thing I think is really interesting for threat modeling is, it's mostly theoretical, but if you can back it up with some technical testing as well, and get some of that empirical piece to it, you can really see like, okay, we're paying X amount for this control. It's providing what? It overlaps with all these other ones. Why do we have it? Right? Things like that. On the offensive side, I think threat modeling can generally be helpful when we're trying to direct our research. There's only a limited amount of time that we can spend in pure research. And so, as we're doing our threat models on our side, we're looking at like, okay, where can we get the greatest value? Because it's kind of a budget in a way, trying to decide where that goes. Yeah, and those both kind of cross over to actually how money is spent. So the budgeting piece. So I kind of talked about things, and I'm not going to just rail on vendors too much, but I do think that obviously if you have a profit motive, you're only going to push one threat model. So I would not depend on any branded threat actor report to be the end all be all of your how you're doing your threat modeling. They're definitely good, and a lot of reports, I mean, their quality has gotten much better than it used to be, and certainly read them. But I would just make sure that you're able to get information outside there. I think a lot of times people in this industry, and this is just a generalization, but we kind of chase this as a passion. Like maybe we're into it because we just love it, and I think that's dangerous for the burnout piece, because I don't know if this is shared or not, but a lot of you, myself included, I could just hack all day and then wake up and hack all the next day, and do that for extended periods of time where you're just going to get burned out. And when you're burned out, no one wants to be like, let's get creative and think about our threat models. And be like, let's go home. Like, so yeah. And generally, the third is just lack of exposure. Things like this are a good way to combat that. It's like get together and talk to people. I've very much enjoyed getting some close friends where you can have a friend DA and talk about how things are going down, emerging threats, and things that people might have had success with. Some people even sharing failures. Generally, I mean, I was on the red team. I don't know, I didn't share this so much, but it's like 99% failing. There's a lot of failing that goes along. I have this crazy idea, like, oh, here's an instance. I had this great plan. Yep. I don't. Okay, I think I can share this. So yeah, it's fine. I had an idea that I could get an app into the Microsoft App Store. Their dev license is cheap, so I bought one, and I built this app that would dynamically load whatever I wanted to, right? So, and it was signed by Microsoft. The beauty there is that they allow you to do private betas. So I built this app very specific to my client. It took me several days. I was writing all this weird, crappy code, and I sent it off to the client as a private beta. But first, you have to be approved by Microsoft, which I was like, this will be no problem. Microsoft doesn't validate anything. So they do, but not like you would expect. They kept coming back and telling me that they were getting some error with my code that wasn't what I was seeing on my machine. They even told me like the hardware they were testing on, things like that. And so that basically just totally crashed and burned. I never even got to deliver it, but someday I will. Just use Roblox. Roblox, they're hiring, by the way. So. Wait, you're seeing Roblox on your network? I think it's Lua. It runs Lua. I love Lua. So that would actually be really fun. And I could bribe with some Robux Like, see how it goes. I'll just target a certain age group in your organization. So
College students. No, it's college.
Really?
So yeah.
It's not younger?
No.
I wonder if the college students have kids that are using a laptop.
Oh, I've definitely seen that. Yeah.
The children.
Or have the children.
Yeah.
Just do what Roblox does. around children.
Roblox really exploits children to build their games, which I feel like is kind of bad.
Yeah.
It's like digital child labor. Yes. All right. So that's kind of an overview. I hope that was valuable. If you have any questions, feel free. We can cut the recording for the questions. Then we get better questions. Yes.